Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. I'm Justin from LitTube. You're watching a reaction and analysis video of the CNN debate, the fight over Obamacare, with Senators Sanders and Klobuchar versus Senators Graham and Cassidy. There's going to be a couple parts to this video. First, I want to break down a little bit about the Graham Cassidy proposal. I think that's an important thing to talk about as a vote is coming up on this. And I kind of just want to go over the points that Graham and Cassidy were making in support of their bill and kind of try to point out some of the positives and weaknesses in it. So I'm going to start there.
So, Senators Graham and Cassidy belong to the GOP. They're both Republican senators, and they came together with this Graham Cassidy bill to come together with a joint effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. It's purely a Republican bill. There wasn't really any collaboration on it from the Democratic side. This is their effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. So I just want to go over on debate night. They said they basically laid out what this bill would do in that it would take block grants, take them basically by getting rid of Obamacare, take the money from Obamacare and bring it back to the states so that the governors of each state can decide on their own state's health care, which in theory doesn't sound like a terrible idea. But when you start digging deeper into what their bill would actually do, first of all, the CBO scored it and didn't have much time really to analyze it, given how quickly they've been trying to push this through and get a vote. But they said that millions would lose their insurance. They said that premiums would go up. It was also revealed on debate night that the bill would completely defund Planned Parenthood, which 1 out of every 5 women in the country rely on for their health care needs. And on top of all that, you also look at the fact that the bill doesn't have any concrete protections for people with pre-existing conditions. There is some language in the bill that suggests that they'd have access to affordable and quality health care. But what does access mean? That really just means the opportunity to go out and get it. But if it's too expensive, then you can't really actually afford it. You know what I mean? So there's no concrete protections in there for pre-existing conditions, which is a huge problem. And you also think about Bernie Sanders made this point during the debate that back when the states had control, was there any protection for pre-existing conditions in the vast majority of the states? No, there weren't. All the governors and all the state governments did not provide those protections in place. So there's a lot of problems with the Graham Cassidy bill. And while in theory, if you put all the money back to the states and didn't try to do anything shady, putting pork in your bill, maybe it could create a decent system for healthcare if all the states did what they were supposed to do with the money and actually were smart about the way they created their healthcare system. But there's just too many holes in this and too many problems, and the fact that it's trying to defund Planned Parenthood and people are going to go off their insurance, and there's just a lot of problems with the bill in its current form. They've actually revised it a couple times, and the results just aren't good. And it should also be noted that the Graham Cassidy bill, while it doesn't pass the Congressional Budget Office's test, it doesn't either pass the American People's test, as out of all the Americans polled on this, only 20% support the Graham Cassidy bill. Now, you can chalk some of that up to potentially people not knowing what's in the bill, but at the end of the day, should something go through the government and become law if only 20% of the American people support it? I would think not. So now that we've covered the Graham Cassidy bill, why don't we give you an idea of what Klobuchar and Sanders have to offer on their side of the debate? So I'll start with Senator Klobuchar. She's a bit more centrist and more of I guess, a realist than Bernie Sanders in the sense that she wants to find consensus and middle ground between the Democrat and Republican Party to get a bipartisan effort going here to fix Obamacare, not repeal and replace, but fix some of the problems with it is what she wants to do. One of the things she mentioned was a bipartisan bill that's currently going through Congress that's getting overshadowed by the Graham Cassidy bill, but that actually is being worked on currently. And she mentioned something about a reinsurance concept. And the way she explained it, it was basically the idea of, okay, all the people that are have pre-existing conditions and are the highest cost, the government is just going to take care of them completely, and then that should lower the premiums for everyone else that's in the Obamacare pool. So think about it as if people have these serious illnesses like cancer or something else that costs a ton of money to treat, and the government basically just pays for their whole thing as part of a reinsurance program. And then everyone else, because they're not in the same pool as those high-risk people that are having the expensive procedures, the premiums, in theory, should come down since they're not in the same pool as the other people. So it's an interesting concept and something that could actually play out in a decent way. But still, it does at the same time continue to rely on the health insurance companies, as Obamacare does and as the system before did. So in my opinion, it's not ideal, but it is something to be considered, at least in the short term, as a temporary fix to Obamacare. And then, of course, you have the idealist in this debate, Bernie Sanders, independent senator from Vermont. He wants to get the United States ultimately on a system that is similar to what Canada does and what countries in Europe do, what every other major country in the world does, actually, which is a single-payer type of healthcare system. In our case, it would be expanding Medicare so that it covers everybody in the country. That is what he's been advocating for a long time now. He does see value in short-term fixes to Obamacare. He's definitely against repeal and replace, as pretty much all the Democrats are. But his big push is really for the single-payer system, and he makes a lot of good points on it, over the fact that you think about how much the United States pays for drugs compared to other countries that would be fixed under that plan. You think about how there's still people in our country that cannot get coverage because of the insurance companies charging too much. That would be a fix. Really, if you want my honest opinion on Medicare for All, the only real losers in Medicare for All are people that already have really nice health insurance and can afford it. So it helps the wealthy and the upper middle class, I think, to not have a Medicare for All. And also, of course, the corporations that would be big losers in Medicare for All, because you'd have no need for health insurance companies. And also the pharmaceutical industry and other types of healthcare-related industries would likely make less money as a result of being a part of the Medicare for All system. But in terms of the poor, the middle class, and possibly even the upper middle class, I think would benefit greatly from a Medicare for All system, and the fact that you're going to save money, not having to pay all those ridiculous premium bills to the insurance companies that exist for the sole purpose of making a profit. Not to make people better, but to make a profit. That's why those companies exist. That's why all the healthcare companies exist. It's about making money. And the Medicare for All takes a big chunk of that out of the equation. I think back to the debate, Graham and Cassidy, they're very much against the expansion of government programs like that. But yet, Medicare is very popular. The VA is very popular. And, Graham went and said that the federal government, what it does the best job of is protecting the country. Well, if the federal government can do that and do it well, why can't it do healthcare well, you would think? So, granted, that's the position of Klobuchar and Sanders, respectively. And let's move on to discuss my general analysis and reaction to this debate. So before I come off as being totally biased and in favor of the liberal position on this particular issue, which, by the way, I am registered as an independent voter, so depending on the issue, I could have a liberal or a moderate or a conservative viewpoint. It really just varies issue to issue, but on this one, I would say that I side with the Medicare for All, the liberal portion of the debate. And this is, but I don't want to totally act like Graham and Cassidy made zero good points, because they do have a point when they say that Obamacare is heavily flawed. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I actually happen to be fortunate enough to live in a state where Obamacare works reasonably well. I have an insurance plan that I feel is while it could be, less, it is affordable for me. And there's competition. There's several different insurance companies and many different insurance plans I could have picked from. But here's the thing, where Graham and Cassidy have a good point, is that like there are certain states out there that aren't as fortunate, where they only have one insurance company that's even like still on the exchange. And at that point, if you can only pick plans from one insurance company in your state, that means there's a monopoly for that insurance company. And what that means is they can essentially charge you whatever the hell they want. So that's a huge problem with Obamacare right now, that they need to find a way to fix it, if it's even possible to fix. And that's another thing that was interesting when I was watching this debate, is that it seemed like Sanders was, he threw out a couple lines where he was kind of like defending Obamacare and saying that, oh, we need to find some short-term fixes. But you could tell that Sanders, in the back of his mind, was like, yeah, Obamacare, we could scrap it. What we really need is the single-payer Medicare for all. I need to get everybody to work towards that. But Sanders also realizes that in the short term, that's impossible to do. You have a government that's completely controlled by the Republicans, from the presidency to the senator, the Senate, and the House. There's no way on earth you're passing single payer right now. It's just not possible given the current administration. So that's why Bernie also realizes, well, I need to point out some good things that Obamacare does and try to get everyone on board with just fixing it, instead of scrapping it and going to a batshit Republican plan that is going to throw people off insurance. Klobuchar, she's like I said earlier, she's centrist. She wants to build the consensus and get something through that works for both parties, and make legitimate fixes to Obamacare. But there's a lot to fix with Obamacare. Obamacare did some good things. It made it so that you have pre-existing conditions, you can find coverage. If you literally are so poor that you can't afford anything, you can essentially get your health insurance subsidized to the point where it's free. So, it's great for poor people. It's great for people with pre-existing conditions, but there's people in the middle class that are really struggling with the rising premiums, and the fact that a lot of these states, there's becoming less and less competition as healthcare insurance companies pull out of the exchange, and there becomes less and less of them to compete against each other. So these are legitimate issues, and granted that the Republican idea of getting all the power back to the states, it's honestly not the worst idea I could think of, really, because it would have to work in a pure way, and that's where things get muddied, because, first of all, they're porking their bill with stuff like, oh, we're going to get rid of Planned Parenthood, we're going to do this, that, and the other, when really, if all it really was, okay, we're giving all this federal money back to the states in a way that's fair to each state, by the way, and they have to use it on healthcare. The concept isn't terrible, but it's the fact that when the CBO scored their bill, and you look at some of the other things their bill does that they didn't talk about on the debate stage, it's clear that the bill is not right, and it's the fact that they're trying to push it through so fast. It's just like a political thing. It's just they're trying to get a political win. Trump wants a political win, which, by the way, Trump tweeted during the debate, basically shitting on John McCain for like coming out against his, saying he's going to vote no to this bill. Like, it's like, really, dude, you're like sending tweets mid-debate, like with saying that John McCain flip-flopped. Like, come on, dude. But anyways, so I will grant the Republicans that on this issue, that there are some legitimate concerns with Obamacare, and frankly, there are some legitimate concerns with a Medicare for All system too. I mean, no system is perfect. With Medicare for All, there are disadvantages. There is the fact that because everyone's going to be covered, which is, by the way, a great thing, that could make wait times for treatment longer. Potentially it could do that if everyone is covered and everyone feels free to seek treatment whenever the hell they need it. That would make sense, that it takes a little longer to see your doctor or a little longer to get a procedure. That would make sense given that everyone is going to see the doctor when they have a problem. But then there's also the issue of, okay, well, how much of the budget is it going to take up to implement Medicare for all, because as we know, we're already just about $20 trillion in the hole as a country, and you figure that by expanding a entitlement program or a social program, it's going to add to the debt. But my counter argument is, look at Norway. Norway is a country that has no net debt, zero net debt, and yet they have a single payer healthcare system where everyone's covered. Now you ask, well, how do they do that? Honestly, I haven't researched Norway enough to know the ins and outs of everything in their government, but I can tell you that they spend a heck of a lot less on their military than the United States does. So that's something you factor in. The United States has to cut back on the military, and if you can do that, well, if you can cut back on military spending, especially wasteful military spending, which a lot of it frankly is, you have more money to put towards other things like Medicare for all. Um, so take that piece of information and think on it, and then also think on the fact that if people are paying less for healthcare because they have Medicare for all, I understand people are going to be taxed more, but for the vast majority of people, it's going to work out in their favor because they're not paying the damn insurance companies premiums plus co-pays and whatever the hell else, which ends up being more money for the vast majority of people in this country, unless you're like super wealthy. Yeah, I mean, so what if you have to pay more taxes if it's a net savings for you and your family? So that's the whole point behind all this. But frankly, if we're going to talk single payer, you have to understand the Democrats aren't totally on board with it yet. You know, you got a lot of moderates, you got a lot of corporate Democrats that aren't leaning that direction yet, or perhaps they're faking like they're leaning that direction for political support when really they don't believe in it. And of course, the Republicans are going to be completely opposed to any extra entitlements or social programs. So that's kind of the state we're in. Until you get more liberal politicians in there that believe in single payer, it's just not going to be an option. So given our current climate, I will sum it up with this. Obamacare definitely has flaws. In my state, not so much, but in other states, I understand that it does. You know, whenever you get down to one insurer and it's a monopoly, that is a humongous problem. So I understand the rising premiums and the lack of competition in the marketplace. Huge problems that they need to work on fixing. If they can't find a way to fix it with a middle ground solution, then they need to go to Medicare for all. It's the logical thing to do when every other major country does it, and it's also been proven that it is a possibility to have that and still have a debt-free government. Hello, Norway, right? So we need to start looking to the Scandinavian countries as to how they run their governments. I mean, if you can have no debt and still provide everybody with free education, free healthcare, you're doing something right. But the United States, I mean, frankly, we were built on capitalism. You know, we were built on that type of system where you go out and you earn for yourself everything that you get. You know, you fight for it, you get it yourself. Like, that's the mentality in this country, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon. But, you know, there's some things that government can do better than the free market, and healthcare, I believe, is one of those things. You know, the profit motive is great for a lot of industries, but when it comes to healthcare, you know, no. I just want the people to be able to get their coverage at the lowest possible price, because you know what? It's just one of those things, man. It's life and death. That's the difference between this and going out and buying some other kind of product or service. This is life and death you're talking about. So either you got to have everybody covered, or it's got to be, you know, completely single payer system. But going in the direction of just trying to pork a bill and then also rely totally on the governors of each state, don't think it's the way to go. I really don't. And hopefully the government can figure this out sooner rather than later, because meanwhile, Obamacare is imploding over time, slowly. It is imploding. And if they're not on board with fixing it, I don't know what the hell is going to happen. I honestly don't know. If they can't reach a consensus, there's going to be huge problems and suffering in this country. But anyway, as for the debate, you know, there was a lot of interesting things that happened, but overall, Graham and Cassidy kind of made fools out of themselves. And I would say that Sanders and Klobuchar definitely put on a better performance in this debate. But honestly, how could they not when their ideas were just far superior to the bill that was put up by Graham and Cassidy? So thanks for watching. Subscribe to LitTube and stay tuned for future updates.